Okay, so in this video, we're going to go over some examples of moral statements and non-moral statements. And in doing so, we're also going to be going over examples of general moral principles and particular moral judgments. You got already an initial set of moral statements and non-moral statements from the reading, but unlike the author, this lesson is going to show you, is going to include or differentiate from examples that are particular moral judgments and those that are general moral principles. I'm going to provide you with new examples that come from our case study, that is the killing of George Floyd and the aftermath that followed. So first, let's look at some examples of a statement that is assigning a moral value to something or someone, and let's focus on a general moral principle. Our first example is going to focus on a claim that a wide category of actions or decisions are right or wrong. So example one for general moral principle will be one that I'm sure you are familiar with: killing is wrong. Okay, so let's look at another example. Example two. So another example of a general moral principle would also be a claim that a wide category of actions or decisions are right or wrong, and this time a different moral term is going to be used. We are going to use the term duty to say that something is the morally correct thing to do. It would be wrong if you didn't do this thing. So we're going to say we have a duty to help others. Okay. And then our third example would be it is morally permissible to engage in civil protest. Okay, so here we have the action is killing. The word that's naming a moral value that actually is assigning a moral value to something is wrong. So can you see how the word wrong names a moral value assigned to the wider category or a wide category of killing? You can kill in all kinds of ways. That's why this is considered to be a category of action, killing. Abortion, some would say, is killing. Capital punishment, shooting someone, stabbing someone. So this is a general claim about any kind of killing always being wrong. Example 2 says we have a duty. So the moral term, the word that names a moral value is duty. When we look at this sentence and read it in context, we come to understand that duty is being assigned to something. What is the word duty being assigned to? What action? What possible category of actions? What is a wide category of possible actions that duty is being assigned to? You should have said help others. Or if I was going to ask you for an answer in a full sentence, you would actually say helping others is the action to which the moral value of duty is being assigned. So again, I want you to see that. Now with this claim, what's being said when we use duty in the moral sense is we say, because like at work you can have duties, like what are your on-the-job duties. Most of the time we don't mean that in a moral sense. Hence why I said these words or phrases typically indicate or name a moral value. Remember, I'm always going to stress this over and over again. You have to always keep in context either a claim or a statement, a premise or a conclusion, but you also have to keep in context words within a sentence to know for sure how they're functioning. So sometimes duty is used in the moral sense, sometimes it is not. Here, duty is being used in a moral sense, and you can tell in context of the sentence. In other words, they're stating it's wrong to never help others. It is the morally correct thing to do, that is, to help others. That's one way to understand how duty is a moral term. In this one, what is the moral language that is being used? What two words do you see that tell us a moral value? It could be, we don't know for sure. Well, we do, because I'm putting it under this column header here. But if we didn't know, if we just saw this out of context of the lesson, how would we first, what would be a strategy to decide whether or not this functions as a moral statement? Well, we'd look to see if there are any words or phrases that name moral values, and we see it here. It's a two-word phrase. So morally permissible means it would not be wrong if you did it. You'd have no obligation to avoid something. So that's another example as well. And I realize there's a kind of example that I don't have in here. So I think we're going to make this example 4. And then we're going to make example 3 right here. We're going to squeeze it in. So example 3. All right. And we're going to say good people are kind to others. Sorry, I'm squeezing that in there, but I really want this kind of example. So here the moral value is good, and it's being assigned to an entire class of people. What entire class? People who are kind. So good people are kind to others. So, or it's being assigned to a class of people that is the class of people who are being kind. I could have said people who are kind to others are good people. It would have been easier to see that we're talking about a class of people. But goodness is being assigned to people who are kind. So good people are kind to others. All right. It is, and then we've got it is morally permissible. Okay. So now we have here, for example, we're going to say 1 for this one, for this category, or for this term. Here we're going to have it was wrong, or the wrong thing to do, you could say, of Chauvin to kill George Floyd. So, like example 1, for moral statement, general moral principle, example 1, moral statement, particular moral judgment, these are both assigning the moral value of what? Wrongness to something. Here, wrongness is being assigned to the wider category of killing, generally, any kind of killing. Here, it's talking about the killing of a specific person. So it's talking about someone, a particular person, who actually killed a particular person. So we're saying it was wrong of Chauvin to do what? To kill George Floyd. So that's the action, the killing of George Floyd. It was wrong. We just happen to know that it was Chauvin. All right. So can you see how this is more particular and aligned with our definition for particular judgment? We're saying claims a particular action or decision is itself right or wrong. So what we're saying is the action that Chauvin took, killing George Floyd, that this action was what? Wrong. And notice that we're making a particular moral judgment about something that already happened. So you can make particular moral judgments about the past. All right, so example 2, it's going to be the assisting officers had a duty to help George Floyd. Okay, so where's the moral value here? It's right here. It's named by duty. And then what is the action? What is the action that is being named? That is a specific one, right? Help George Floyd. So again, do you see the difference between this statement and that statement? Well, we can even start with the similarity. They're similar. They're both moral statements because they both assign a moral value to something or someone. They are similar also because they are both assigning a duty. They're saying something is a duty. In other words, it's a strict obligation. It would be wrong if something didn't happen, or it was wrong because something did not happen. What's different is that this is about a wide category of actions, right? This is about helping others. Of course, there's many different ways we can help people, so that's why this is general. But look at how specific this is. This is talking about a specific group of people in a specific moment in time with respect to another specific person and inaction that did not occur in a specific moment in time. All right, so let's go to example 3. It says good people are kind to others. So we could say the bystanders were kind. Now, I'm giving examples that are past tense for particular moral judgments, but we could make them for future. So let's say you have a moral decision to make. Let's just pick one that's not related to George Floyd. You're thinking about getting an abortion, or a friend's thinking about getting an abortion. They don't know if it's the right or wrong thing to do. You could tell your friend it would be wrong for you to get an abortion, or it's morally permissible for you to get an abortion. Well, there you're making a particular moral judgment about an action, a particular action that a particular person might make in the future. So the main point from that verbal only example is that particular moral judgments can be made about things from the past, the present, or the future, actions that we're considering taking but have not yet taken, for example. All right, so example 4, we'll make this one about the future. It would be morally permissible. Sorry, I cut off my R with my M. For Dr. C ethics class to protest the killing of George Floyd. Okay. So again, the moral terminology is here. Morally permissible. Let's scope over what is a 2-word concept. And then what is particular in here? Well, the particular is Dr. C's ethics class could do what? Not just any protest, but the what? The protest anything, right? So what are we protesting? Or could we protest the killing of George Floyd? So here I've made an example. I've created an example of something that we're thinking about in the future that has not happened. Maybe we already know that this is a general moral principle. We know that generally speaking, it's morally permissible to engage in civil protest. We know that. And now we're thinking, hey, we're in ethics class. Should we, would it be okay if we decided to engage in civil protest or to protest the killing of George Floyd? And we can say, well, it's a well-known fact that it is morally permissible to engage in civil protest, and so you might then reach the particular moral judgment that it would be morally permissible for Dr. C's class to protest the killing of George Floyd. So here is a particular moral judgment that is future-based. You're trying to make a moral decision. You have to make a moral choice to make. You're trying to evaluate the morality of an action that has not yet happened. But again, notice the difference here. This is much more general in nature compared to this one, which is much more specific compared to this one. Similarities. They both use the concept of moral permissibility, so they're both using moral concepts. They're both assigning moral permissibility to something, so they're both moral statements. They're both talking about protest in some way. This is talking about civil protest generally. There's all kinds of civil protest in terms of how you can do civil protest and what you can protest civilly, whereas this is very specific, particular. It's talking about a specific group of people, Dr. C's ethics class, protesting a particular issue, the killing of George Floyd. Okay, so I hope you're beginning to see why these are moral statements, but these are also moral statements. But likewise, I hope you're beginning to understand why these are considered general moral principles and why these would be considered particular moral judgments, at least when contrasting them to these statements. And I hope you can see why these are general moral principles, at least when contrasting them to these statements. Okay, so we have one last set of examples to go through, and that has to do with, and I'm going to draw an arrow to make sure we don't forget about that and make sure you see that we do have examples. Non-moral statement. Okay. Oops. I know I have this weird piece of paper, and that's because I had some other examples, and I just decided I did not like them, even though I did create them in advance. and I didn't want to redo this, so I just kind of winged it here, put a piece of paper on top of that mess. Okay, so now let's create some non-moral statements, and just for clarity's sake, to iterate the point, to iterate the distinctions, we're going to do some that connect with but are not the same statement as the ones before. So killing is wrong. It was wrong to kill Chauvin it was wrong of Chauvin to kill George Floyd. So we want a non-moral statement. We want a statement, so we want an assertion about reality that does not assign a moral value to anything, to no one, to no action, to no choices, no decisions. So what do we know about Chauvin and Floyd? This is a moral claim. It's saying that it was wrong of Chauvin to kill George Floyd. But for all we know, that's a weird statement because Chauvin never killed Floyd. But in fact, Chauvin did kill Floyd, right? It's a fact. So we want to assert that as a fact in and of itself. Chauvin killed George Floyd. Okay. Warning, warning, warning. You might want to write this down in your list of warnings or whatnot. A lot of people will see a statement like this and they'll feel compelled through fast, impulsive thinking to say that this is a moral statement. But you have to go back to the definition for moral statement. Assigns a moral value to something. Look at the words and phrases. This is pretty comprehensive, but it's not exhaustive, of words that typically indicate a moral value is being used. Not necessarily assigned, but used. Do you see any words in here that say wrong, right, good, bad, obligation, duty, just, anything like that? No. Killing is an action. That's about a past action. But that is not a moral term in and of itself. What students do is they'll take this belief, what is currently believed to be true, and they'll take an extra intellectual step of the mind to infer on the basis of this something else, a moral claim. Then what they do in their mind is they conflate the two things. The fact that is not a moral statement that is currently believed to be true, and they conflate it with an inference that killing is wrong. And then they'll decide that this is a moral statement, but it's not. This is a non-moral statement. When you're telling me something's a moral statement, you need to make sure that it has these words, right, or some version of these words. Like I said, I might not have thought of everything in the statement. Okay, so now compare this to these. Okay, so there's no moral terminology in this one. This one has wrong, wrong. Down here we had like duty, morally permissible, duty, morally permissible. What this statement has in common with these two is that this one shares in common with this one that they're both talking about killing, one generally, one specifically. What this one has in common with this one is that this one is particular in that it names a particular set of persons. Still, no moral value is assigned. Example 2. So for example 2, we are going to write the assisting officer did not help George Floyd. Again, do you see any words naming any moral concepts in here? No. This is just making a claim about some person not taking some kind of particular action. So again, for review, for iteration, what does this statement have in common with this statement? Well, they're both talking about what? Help and action. What does this statement have in common with this statement? Well, there's particulars that are mentioned. The assisting officer who was there with this particular person who they attempted to actually arrest, George Floyd. What does this not have in common with both of these? No moral value is assigned. Let's go to example 3. Okay, so for example 3, so we have good people. Oh, you know what? I think I skipped. Oh, no, I didn't. Okay, so good people are kind to others. The bystanders were kind. And here we're going to put the bystanders tried to be kind. Uh-oh, you know what? I just realized I'm not going to redo this video. This is a non-moral statement. What I meant to say here, and you see that I didn't even go over it. I should have said good. I don't know if you guys caught that, but if you did, wow, good job. If you ever notice me making a dumb mistake like that in a video, it's probably because I'm tired, and I am tired because the day I'm making this video, I woke up at 3:30 because my husband was having chest pain. So I'm not excusing myself, I'm just explaining, and I don't have time to redo the video, so I wish I did. I will for next year's students. So what I meant to say here is the bystanders were good. So we could say, or were good people. And actually, I like the example of the bystanders are good people. Okay. If I had more room, I would say the bystanders who asked the officer to check George Floyd's pulse are good people. I'd really like to say that, but I've run out of room. Okay, so here we are assigning the moral value of good to who? Bystanders. So here we're assigning the moral value of goodness to an entire class, to a particular group of people. So this says good people are kind to others. This one is saying that a particular group of people. So you can assign a moral value to an individual person, but you can also assign a moral value to a group of people. Just like up here, we assigned a moral value to an action, and that is helping George Floyd with respect to assisting officers. Here we assigned the moral value of wrongness when it comes to the action of killing George Floyd with respect to Chauvin. Down here, we're assigning the moral value of goodness to a group of people, right? That is the bystanders. And in context, you probably knew that I meant the bystanders who were watching what happened to George Floyd. So that's still particular because that's who I'm thinking of. I just didn't get to write it out. Okay, so then we can have the bystanders tried to, we could say tried to be helpful. They did. They tried to help George Floyd, right? Okay, so again, this doesn't say whether it's wrong or right to be helpful. It doesn't say that the bystanders were good or bad. All it says is that there's this group of people and they tried to be a certain way. It's a non-moral statement. Remember, these are all non-moral statements. Let's compare and contrast again. So here we're talking, what does this statement have in common with this statement? Well, they're both talking about what? They both mention, well, this one doesn't mention kindness, but maybe helpful is the kind of kindness, so maybe that's an inference we could make. So they're both referencing what? We could say character traits. And these don't have to correspond to either of these. I could give you completely different examples in here. I could give you completely different examples about different topics in here. All right, so what does this one have in common with this one? But of course, these two are different because no moral values assigned in this one, but there is in this one. This one differs from this one because what? This one is assigning a moral value. This one is not, of course. It's a non-moral statement. But they do have in common that they're referencing a specific group of people, the bystanders. And again, in context, I mean those who watched George Floyd get killed. Example 4. So for example 4, let's do Dr. C's students will protest the killing of George Floyd. Okay, I'm going to redraw a line to create my text box. So right now it's kind of blurring together and it would be more useful. All right, okay, so I'm just realizing one thing visually that I don't want to lead to incorrect information processing or review. These words apply to both this column and this column. These words are important with respect to this column because you would not see any of, well, actually that's wrong. You could see these words in a non-moral statement, but that doesn't mean, that would mean that they're not actually assigning a moral value. All right, before I go more into that, let's look at this example. Dr. C students will protest the killing of George Floyd. So what does this have in common with this one? Well, they both mention protest, right? So that's a topic, protest. But this one assigns a moral value and this one does not. What about these two? What do these two have in common? Well, they both reference a specific group of people doing a particular kind of protest. So they have that in common. But like with this one, these two are different in that this one does not assign a moral value and this one does. Okay, so one last note, and you can put that, oh, and make sure that you realize that what this over here in the third column is giving you examples of. Okay, and it helps if you go like this to see the differences. All right, so one last thing I want to say, an example is given to you in your book. So let's do it, let's do this way. So let's say that we say, so let's say that we say Dr. C tries to do the morally correct thing every time. So as you know, morally correct is a phrase that typically tells you a moral value is being named. And that's true. So it's saying that she tries to do what? The right thing. But is this a moral claim? The answer is no. This is a claim about what? A specific person trying to do something. So the thrust of the claim is that somebody's trying to do something. What if I wrote Dr. C tries to remind students of deadlines at least once a week? It's really obvious that this is a non-moral claim, right? But what is the thrust? It's about what is Dr. C trying to do? It's the same thing here. Dr. C is trying to do something. That is the thrust of the claim up here, just as it is down here. Here, the thing that she's attempting is to do the morally correct thing. Here, it's to remind students of deadlines. But this is, write this down, a non-moral statement, even though it has a word, phrase, that names a moral value. And that is why I keep emphasizing to you guys, you gotta pay attention to the context in which a word is used. Just like the premise indicators. You could have the word for all by itself, and if you don't pay attention to context, you might tell me that for, when it's being used as a preposition, is being used as a premise. So always keep context in mind when trying to decide whether a statement is a moral statement or a non-moral statement. And the other thing that I want to emphasize that it's really important whenever you are attempting to classify statements as moral or non-moral, you do want to look at the examples, but it's just as important to look at the definitions. Philosophy is really a lot about definitions. That's when one student, they said, I didn't realize how important definitions are in philosophy. And yes, the philosopher Blackburn, Simon Blackburn, talks about philosophy as conceptual engineering, whereas a structural engineer looks at how the parts of physical things hang together, like in a building. A philosopher as conceptual engineer is interested in how we define concepts and the examples that we give for said concepts and trying to come to the true meaning of things through those concepts and our discussion of the definition of and examples for that definition. So whenever I have you tell me something's a moral statement or a non-moral statement, a general moral principle or particular moral judgment, it is absolutely vital that you always go back to the definitions as well as to the examples. Don't rely on the examples or own. Remember, memory is imperfect. It's likely that you forget this. You want to make sure you come back to your notes, to your toolkit.